The Magic Portal. It's a classic. We all know and love it. Created by Australian animator Lindsay Fleay in 1985 to 1989, it is arguably the most well-known and best brick film from that time period. For a film school project, I was fortunate enough to get in contact with him and interview him about this film. The assessment for film school is only 90 seconds long, but Fleay brought in a piece of brick filming history and a lot of information about the making of the film, so I felt a longer extended cut is what was needed to do this justice. Enjoy. So we'll begin by just asking, what is your name and what is your career?
Okay, so my name is Lindsay Fleay. I'm into visual effects, 3D animation, and of late, well, last 10, 15 years, I've been a TAFE lecturer at Joondalup TAFE. I'm also a Wanimate committee member, so it's a little industry group that deals with animation or in WA and trying to get that off the ground and support it and get all the little animators out there actually talking to each other, because they all tend to hole up in their basements and with their Lego collections and disappear, basically.
Yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Yes, well, you're not alone. It's a demographic. And so what we found was, students coming out of UWA or students, well, I don't think UWA has an animation course, but students coming out of Curtin or Murdoch tend to stick together like a social club. They don't talk amongst each other. So essentially what we're trying to do at Wanimate is to basically broaden that base and sort of foster a sense of community as much as we can. So that's the sort of stuff I'm doing currently. Yeah.
What intrigued you about like animation? Because you mentioned about the Magic Portal.
Animation always,
as well.
Animation always intrigued me, and I was always into it. I mean, when I was a little kid, I was, I think, what felt like the only science fiction fan in my primary school, and I found I had an affinity for writing, and I really got into that. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to be a science fiction writer when I grow up. And then eventually I realised, no, actually, writing's a bit of a drag. I mean, I could churn it out because I was totally enthusiastic about it, but it always felt a bit one-dimensional, a little bit one-eyed. And I found, you know what? Graphic arts is looking more promising. It's like I had more of a visual flair, and every time I showed my writing to anyone, they'd say, "Oh, I don't know about the story, but it was very visual." So I thought, "Oh, I'll be a comic book artist then." I thought, "Yeah, I'll go into that." And then I realised, no, that's not it either. I thought, "Oh man, I'll make movies and or make animation." And then suddenly that clicked. At age 15, I seemed to be the only person in my high school that seemed to have a clear idea of where they wanted to go. The only thing that frustrated me is that I had nothing to work with except what I built myself. So I had to somehow scrounge around and build it myself, really. Yeah, and so I did the film courses and the Swinburne animation course back in 1990, and yeah, off I went.
What was the first animation you did? Was it the claymation, like just the?
Well, it would have been a lot of little Super 8 experiments, really. I think I did make a little Lego film early on called Legomatics, which won a little prize at the, oh gosh, what was it? The 1984, was it 1984 Young Filmmakers Awards or something? And it was hosted by FTI, which is down in Fremantle, or used to be down in Fremantle. And the Film and Television Institute used to do lots of little animation and community-based film exercises. And that little triumph, like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I can make these things. And I went off. So when I was thinking about, well, how am I going to make a proper one? I think, oh, I've got to go up to the big world now, 16 mil, not 8 mil. And then I basically started looking around to work out how I was going to do it. Since the Legomatics film had worked pretty well, that sort of put a strong flavour or strong case for making the next one out of the same material, just basically making the same film but scaling it up. Yeah, I went through a lot of different things. I wanted to be serious. So I was a big fan of the Canadian Film Board back then. They had all kinds of stop motion and stuff like that. So I was very much into stop motion. The few animators I did meet all seemed to have Disney walk cycles on their bedroom walls. I didn't. I was kind of channeling Hollywood movies and trying to learn what Hitchcock was doing, just to work out, okay, there's a film language thing going on here. How do I use it? And that's what informed it. So the filmmaking came first. The fact it's Lego is almost incidental. So yeah, it just happened to be what I made a little bit before when I was playing around in my backyard. And I think, you know what, if I'm going to go solo on this, then I'll use that as a way to kind of get there.
Do you still have that first film, the Lego Maddox?
Oh, yeah, it's around somewhere. I think I had it on a U-matic tape, which is, God, if you can find a machine that can play that. But I think I might have had it digitized somewhere. It's floating around somewhere. I just don't know where it lives.
Yeah, because that'd be really cool to see. Because that's even earlier.
It's. I nearly destroyed the film. It was shot on Super 8 and then backwards and forwards in a projector to edit, and burnt out the transformer on the projector. Whoops. Sorry, Grandad. And then basically, just about, it's only the scratches that are holding it together. It's just virtually nothing left of it. But yeah, it's around somewhere. I just don't know where. Anyway, I'll have to check my old files. I think I might have digitized it with a whole pile of other things, but it might be a digitization of an old VHS tape or something.
It would still be incredibly cool to see, because I can guarantee not a lot of people probably have seen
No,
it.
no, it's except a whole bunch of little school kids watching Behind the News for 1984 or something. And you get to see me as a bit of a nerd back then. It's like terrifying to see. Anyway.
What got you started on the Magic Portal?
Ambition, I think. I effectively started it when I was 18, and I was doing a film course at the same time. So I was doing the Bachelor of Arts in English at Curtin University at the time. So as I was working on the Magic Portal, I was doing film theory and writing essays on this, that and the other, and just learning about postmodernism and generally trying to work out how I was going to make this thing. So it turned my 3-year full-time course into a 4.5-year part-time course. And I think I eventually had it assessed as part of one of my minor units.
Yeah, because I did read about on your website when it was up about how you did the sound and how that took the longest, because 12 months of shooting.
Absolutely.
How did you actually do the sound?
Well, it was basically at uni. I basically made contacts with people, and my media design lecturer, who eventually, George Borzakowski, he basically used my film as part of my assessment, which was kind of nice of him, because I'd pretty much sunk all my time and effort into that. And so he put me onto a guy called Thomas Kaiser, an amazing sound guy and good all-round designer and visual effects artist. I think he's working up in Vancouver at the moment. Hi, Thomas. And without his contribution, I would never have finished the thing. He basically put the whole soundtrack together, or basically assembled and composed all the music and sound effects for it. So we had this amazing 12 months or 18 months where we just sat down and recorded stuff. And then I just go back up to the film huts at Curtin University, get out the old flatbed Steenbeck editing things and just cut this thing together. I think I cut something like 13 mono tracks together to make the soundtrack, or 11 mono tracks together, just to try and get this thing a dense soundtrack, which, looking back on it now, it's like, oh my God, I could do all that in like 3 weeks on, say, After Effects or Premiere. So.
How did you put it all onto film? Because I still don't know how.
Oh right, well, when you're putting a soundtrack, you're literally cutting the sound on film. So if you can imagine leader, and then there's this magnetic layer applied to it like tape. So you get film stock and you basically magnetize one half of it, so it goes opaque, or it's just this extra thin style film that's basically made out of slightly hardened audio tape, but it's got sprocket holes chopped into the side, and you literally backwards and forwards it and line it up by hand, and then they're synced. Get out your charnograph, stick it together. I hope it doesn't, make sure your sync marks are correct.
Wow, that's a very long process.
I mean, even when I first started lecturing back in 2010. God, that's almost 15 years ago now. But in 2010, I said, hi, I do films and, blah, 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 blah. And I'm your lecturer in 3D, and I'm going to show you how to do this stuff and do some animation. And, it's a bit like old-fashioned filmmaking, except it's not. And I got this room full of blank stares. And I said, oh, well, I described to them how you'd used to shoot animation on film. You'd load the camera up, make sure it's all light tight, have the loading bag double layered with armholes, and they honestly thought I was trolling them. I was doing one of those, when I was a kid I walked 20 miles to school in rain and sleet and crawled over broken glass and all that bullshit. And no, I was like, no, this is what you had to do. And what you guys do in like 10 minutes on After Effects or something, as you kind of, I don't know how this works, this is so hard. It's like, that would have taken me 3 months. And I'm not exaggerating saying that. It's like, it would have taken me 3 months. It would have taken me 2 hours just to spool up the bloody 2 tracks at a time or 1 track at a time, carefully work it through. And then I'd basically sit down with my big sheets of paper and just make sure it all lines up. And then when I put it into the mix, cross my fingers and hope it all works. Because I'd only ever see, like, it's like you're trying to navigate around something and you've got this fog of wall that's only about like 10 feet in front of you. And you kind of remember where you've groped around building your film, but a lot of it's in your head. You can't see the whole thing all at once unless you have access to a very expensive mixing suite. And I didn't have that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I had to spend a quarter of my budget in a sound mix. So over the 4.5 year period, 1/4 of my budget evaporated in 4 hours flat. And so like, okay, I better get my shit together for this one. And so yeah, it all worked out, but it took months of prepping and preparation.
I heard you hired professional voice actors as well.
I did. That was where most of that went. And there was a whole rigmarole. I had to go through all that with Actors Equity and stuff like that. And so in the end I said, bugger it, I'm just going to start. Got in trouble with Actors Equity, but it got done. And yeah, they did all the voices in like 4 hours flat. You know, we'd spent 18 months carefully assembling the soundtrack, and then, mixing time, record voices, we're done. Shit. What happened? And yeah, it's like, this is what professionalism is. Okay, I could get into this. And yeah.
So can you describe the creation process of the film? Because I know it would have been a long,
right, okay.
4.5 years.
So it's 12 months of prep work. So most of that would have been me chaining myself to a desk and forcing myself to do storyboards to a certain level of quality. I put in one submission to the funding bodies, and they just absolutely destroyed it. And so there was a couple of things that came up from that. First of all, it's 1985. The Australian Film Commission still exists, the AFC, and there's a thing called the CDF, Creative Development Fund, and this is one of those strange funds where they just give money away. It's like, hi, I'm a filmmaker. Oh, well, here you go, have some money. Oh, great. But I can't just have money given away. I have to put in the pitch and the proposals and the funding. But proposals for funding are just a nightmare. But luckily at FDI, there was a lovely lady called Heather Williams, and she guided me through this whole process. So part of film FDI's community-based sort of art project thing was they basically supported artists and filmmakers making films and helped them get funding. And she guided me through the whole process and helped out. Without her, I don't think I would have got any funding, and it wouldn't have got off the ground. So hats off to her. Hi, Heather, if you're still there. Yeah, so the first one I did was like the usual enthusiastic nerd nonsense, and it's going to be this and awesome, and they just destroyed it. And that's when I realised that, well, these are filmmaking people, live action. They have no idea what animation is. Their idea of animation was Disney films or Saturday morning cartoons in 1984 or 85, and they were really quite hostile to it. And that sort of lack of knowledge and sullen hostility to animation is something I've run into all the time. And even as I moved into visual effects back in the 90s and then still continue with it now, I'm astonished at the number of people that don't know anything about visual effects. I bump into someone who, yes, I studied editing at uni. I did 3 years on it. I'm thinking, great. Oh, well, you know all about green screens and this and that and the other. It's like, cut stuff together, grades it, puts soundtracks on, and that's it. It's like, huh? That's like first week of TAFE in After Effects or something. It's like, okay. So I've always felt that there was always an appalling ignorance about that, and the current VFX crisis in Hollywood hasn't exactly discouraged that. Watching the visual effects community get ground into the dirt, making Marvel films and Netflix all day long. It's like, oh, geez, this feels familiar, but on a vastly bigger scale. So yeah, but with the funding, I had to basically sit down and think, right, I have to convince this hostile audience that this is a viable film. It's a viable animation. I'm going to be using, of all things, Lego, which was like, hi, I'm going to make a Masters of the Universe film. And I'm talking to the people that make The Man from Snowy River, and they're kind of looking at you as if you're an idiot, because, there's no such thing as fandom. There's no such thing as the internet. That's 15 years into the future, really. These people don't even read science fiction half the time. So what do they know about computers or internets or space shuttles or anything like that? That was real space tech stuff. And suddenly became the norm now. But So back then I had to basically make a pitch that was going to basically sell the idea to a hostile audience. So I had to basically sit down and absolutely brutalize my script. Like, right, this is out, that's clearly not going to work. And I was forced to put this thing together in the sense that, oh, well, I'm not making this for myself anymore. I've got to sell it to these people and or to an audience. And it's like that forced me to kind of get out of my shell and, right, this is going to work with people. I need to be able to show this to a bunch of complete strangers and they'll get it. There can be no explanations, nothing. And I'm thinking, geez, I'm going to do this without dialogue. You know, the universal language of old animation, gibberish, which is what a lot of old animations used to use. So that was one thing. And then I had to basically prove my concept. So I had to basically shoot test footage. And I shot a lot of it on Super 8. It's like, right, here's how this is going to work. They're going to be talking and chatting and doing stuff. We won't understand a word of it, but it's going to be like I've got a Lego film crew on a Lego spaceship talking to, you know, Lego characters. And here's how a close-up's going to work. Here's how a panning shot's going to work. Here's how the lights can flicker. You know, and essentially I was channeling Aliens the Nostromo, really, except I didn't have any motor drives or anything like that. So I couldn't do the timed shot exposures that I wanted to do. I wanted to light it with like 2 or 3 LEDs, put the old aperture right down to like a pinhole so everything's razor sharp and in focus, and then take like a 10-second exposure and let the whole LEDs light the whole thing up. So you'd get all the bounce light and all that stuff in there. But I couldn't do that, so I ended up just flooding the thing with light, so it became quite bright. So I was forced to make all these different technical changes and then accommodate them into the production and make them part of the story. So yeah, it was an interesting experience. So I had to basically step out of myself and force myself to do all this stuff. So the storyboards I discovered were, right, this is how I work out what's important, what's not, how much of this I see. And that's when you start thinking, you know what, I could shoot that from the same angle 5 different times. That'll save me production time. So how do I make that interesting when I cut it with all this other stuff? Yeah, just like that all the time. I think I actually I mapped out the entire sets before I started shooting because I knew I couldn't make this up as I shot it. So all those high chase scenes, all the interiors, they're all being plotted out on graph paper beforehand and all worked out. And that was part of that 12-month process. So when I turned up for the second or third round of negotiation, like, righto, you know, brackets, you bastards, here we go, plop, reject that, and they sort of, oh yeah, sure, it's actually not too bad. It's like, oh, it makes sense. It's still animation and Lego though. Out pops the old R&D shot. We can do close-ups, we can do this, we can do all kinds of things, and we can make it interesting. And they sort of grudgingly gave me $11,000. I thought I was the richest human on the planet at the time. And thanks to Heather, you know, I think she helped me make sure that I got the full amount. Well, what they considered to be a pretty pittance, you know, $11,000 isn't going to get you very far in a live-action film shot, but it'll keep you going for a couple of years on animation. And essentially, I think the only restriction I had on the funds was that if I didn't spend the first pile of money properly, I wouldn't get the second pile. So Heather made sure that the first pile of money of the $11,000 was about $10,500. And the other would be a few $100s for post-lab expenses or something. And that worked out pretty well. So, but if I add up all the hours I did, and if I add up all the hours poor old Thomas did, I think it would have come to about 20 cents an hour for like years on end. It's definitely a labour of love. So, yeah. There you go. A bit of a ramble.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how did you actually light like the animation? There are parts where the studs and pieces are lit up.
Yeah,
they have LED Lego brick lights.
Well, they had these little LEDs, where I hardly call them LEDs, they're more like little tiny miniature tungsten light globes. And they were fairly cool, but you couldn't run them for too long because the plastic would soften or you might, you know, shot out. I had basically old-fashioned photography lights, like little round ghosted things, and a couple of aging, yellowing photographic lights I inherited from my granddad. I didn't actually use redheads or anything like that. Even those low-level lights were basically so hot, once you get like a dozen of them in there in a small enclosed space. I had about 4 or 5 fans running at the same time, and there's a couple of shots in there where I had to shoot in slow motion. So there's a couple of empty shots where a character walks into a room, and there's the room there, and I had to shoot it in slow motion because when I flicked the lights on and hit the button to play the camera, the set warped so fast you could actually see the whole set deforming under the heat. Yeah, that was actually a bit of a problem, and I had to be really careful about how I manipulated the Lego because I kept leaving three-dimensional fingerprints in all of it because it'd get so soft, and yeah, it was actually a bit of a problem. So.
Wow, it's so hot they melted the
They,
Lego.
yeah, well, this is old incandescent lighting. What's this stuff? This is all. Is that a redhead these days or?
I don't know, just LEDs.
LEDs, yeah, right. So yeah, LEDs. You know, 90% light, 10% heat, as distinct from an old redhead, which is 90% heat, 10% light.
Yeah, I'd use most animators these days probably use lamps.
Yeah, you do use.
battery.
You'd use an
as
SLR.
well.
You just basically need anything that's got a digital sensor on it. So you don't even need a film camera. You just use an SLR, plug it into your hard drive, and just keep taking stills, and keep taking stills till your hard drive runs out.
Yeah.
And there's an hour worth of 4K video right there. But yeah, the old lights were horrendous. I mean, we had Blondies, the 5K lights. You fired up one of those and put it next to a polystyrene board, and you'd come back in 10 minutes and the board's kind of evaporated under the heat. And you're like, I thought there was a funny smell. We're all breathing polystyrene. It was evil stuff. You had to make sure that when you were going on shoots, the house that you were shooting could actually take turning on more than 2 or 3 of these things on without catching fire.
How challenging was the actual, what was the most challenging part of creating film? Because even for the 80s, it's really well shot.
Yeah.
It's got lots of interesting shots, like one
Right.
particular shot that always stands out to me is one where the I think the yellow spaceman, is running through the spaceship, and you can see it from
It's the tracking shot, right.
The tracking shot.
So first things first, when I was working at how to do the logistics of this, I didn't have any serious technical hardware to work with. So I found myself the world's heaviest tripod and then sandbagged it down with big old plastic sandbags. So it couldn't move. So if you walked into it, you'd break your ankle rather than think. And then basically I just moved the set. So that camera never moves once in that entire film. It's all static shots. The closest I get is if I think there's 1 or 2 pans in there, but they're really fast and rare because they were bloody hard to do. It was just one slight jog and I'm suddenly, oops, there goes the shot.
Yeah, there were some really impressive shots, especially at the beginning where he first discovers the portal and it does that little
Yeah.
360 spin around.
That was a Scrabble board we had on a little basic homemade wooden plinth, and the trouble was the corner of it got stuck on the camera, so it actually goes whoop, sliding sideways before I realised, oh shit, and kind of push it back.
Yeah,
it's
you
like,
can see.
Yeah, it's like, but the thing is, I only had 11 rolls of film, like 100-foot rolls. So I was shooting on a shooting ratio of like 1:1.1. Like I was counting every frame. Like my resources were that tight. It's like, okay, well, I'm sort of stuck with this. I'm stuck with it. The great rotate shot, the money shot just went out the window. It's like, oh well, patch it up, put it in, cross your fingers.
Roughly how many hours and how many photos did this film take? Because it has been a lot.
Well, I would say a better way to put it would be how many months. The actual shoot, so to speak, only took about 9 months. Felt a lot longer, but when I looked at all my calendars and stuff many moons ago, like, oh yeah, that was only 9 months. So I was shooting about a roll every other couple of weeks. And so if I was shooting the spaceship stuff, which had a lot of setups, and every time I took a frame, you'd have to take the whole roof off, move a character, put the whole roof back on again, shoot. It's tightly constrained, so I basically built a set you could just dismantle into pieces and then reassemble again. So when I was designing the set, I was designing the shots, which then informed how the set was built, and then I basically made the set out of separable bits, so I can just pull 2 bits out, or I need to move the camera over here a bit, so I just slide the whole thing like 6 knobs this way and 4 knobs that way, pull all the various bits out. So what you see on camera is only what was there on set. Anything that wasn't on set or not visible just simply wasn't there, and much of that was for ventilation purposes. So yeah, it's interesting going through it digitally, frame by frame. You can see the light's changing in the background a little bit as the roof evaporates as it slides off screen or stuff like that. But it would have been 9 months of shooting, and a shoot would have taken anywhere between 2 and 3 weeks, 7 days a week. I would have started the thing, and a day would have started at 10 a.m. I would have taken a few hours to get started and warmed up, get the first setup set up, and then towards the end of that time, around mid-afternoon, I'm off and running, shooting shots. I might get through depending on how complex the shots were or how often I'm reusing the same angle, I might get through 2, 3, 12 shots, depending on what it was. And some of those 12 shots would be like small little noddy shots, little reaction, what? Or something really, really quite minor. For the big, more sequence shots, they might take me a day or 2 days to get through a couple of shots. But the thing is, once I started something, I couldn't stop. I didn't trust the set to kind of sit there because it would all cool off and start to flex back into a different shape again. So once you start, it's the old Ray Harryhausen thing. You start a shot and you just keep going, and you shoot sequentially. And then you've got a rough idea of how long it's going to go. You sort of worked it out by knobs. That's one nice thing about Lego. And you can kind of get your timing right and then make sure everything choreographs to that. And so a typical reel would take 3 weeks, starting at 10, getting going, falling over at about midnight. So
very late.
Oh yes, it's like it's an inertia thing. It took me a while to get going, and then once I got going, I couldn't really stop.
Yeah, that's definitely me with my animations too. You can go up till 2 a.m. sometimes if I'm feeling it.
That's true. The actual process of animating is quite awful and painful. It's the glittering prize at the end that keeps you going.
Yeah,
really.
It's just that it's all going to look good when it's just finished. What frame rate was the film?
24.
24.
24 frames.
So 24 frames.
It's a proper film.
That is. So I definitely think the number of frames for that must be very high.
Be about do the sums. 24 times 60. What's that in a minute? And there's about 16 minutes in it.
Yeah, there's about maybe 30 seconds. I'd say maybe 10, 20 seconds.
So 30 seconds is roughly 1,500 frames at 25 frames a second. So that's 3,000 times 15. It'd be about 15,000, 16,000 frames.
Wow, that's...
I find that really weird because I'm thinking, I have to do all this stuff just to get the thing done. And then I come up to my students and going, oh no, I've got 4 layers. Oh, it's too much. It's too complicated. It's like, oh gosh, really?
Should have been there in 1985.
I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I should be channeling that creative development fund crowd, like, bloody kids these days, animation, bah humbug, do it properly, smack.
Do you ever get any people at your tape class who are like really surprised about this film and ask you about it?
I've had a few fans walk through. I feel like that country singer who had a hit in 1959 and then for the rest of their lives, it just follows them around. Everywhere they go, can you play that song from 1959? Like, go away. Live a life. So, no, it's fun. But yeah, in small doses. But yeah, I get a couple of fans come through. Kind of fun, yeah, it's a whole different world. So I mean, what you have now is essentially magic boxes that do all this stuff. So I was resigned in my early career, thinking, well, I'm going to have a life of sore backs and bent shoulders and all the rest of it. And then some lovely person invented 3D. Like, I'm so onto that. And then spent the next 20 years getting frustrated at how primitive 3D was. So I got into computer gaming because, it's not just like animation, like I'm in it. And I have agency in here. And that was, the thing that appealed to me about computer games and building all that stuff. So I've done a little bit of work in the games industry, but it was a bit traumatic.
Yeah. What did you like about Lego animation at the time? Because I know
it was easy.
Sour towards the end.
Yeah, it was easy to set up. But I was perpetually frustrated by the fact that as I got slightly better at animating, I hit a hard limit of what this thing could do, which wasn't very much at all. And getting any decent animation or motion out of my characters was really hard. And I just found myself pushing up against a brick wall. It's like, look, I'm going to make one of these things, but I doubt I'm going to make a career out of it. It's just too limited. And so I found, many years later when the internet turned up and there's all these brick films coming out, it's like, ooh, okay, what happened here? And but it's like, well, I wouldn't be part of one of those communities. Like, no, this is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And for a lot of those people, it's a hobby or a means to it's an end in itself. And it's like, it can't sustain it for me. Yeah. Like I say, I was making a film that happened to have Lego in it, not the other way around. So, you know, it definitely wasn't going to be a Star Wars film or a fan film. Here I am trying to get creative development funding to make a creative developed film, an original. There's no way in hell I was going to make a fan film. It didn't even cross my mind. Like, the idea of fandom didn't even exist as far as I was aware. And well, it did, but you know, it wasn't in everyday life. It was just one of those fringe things you'd hear about when you're reading stories about subcultures in the newspaper or something.
Yeah, but it definitely does have that essence of, like, it's a film first, Lego.
Absolutely.
Second, just because of the fact that the faces are drawn on. And I've done little tests of that myself in the past few weeks to just kind of see how difficult it is. And like, this is a really different sort of medium that no one really does.
Yeah,
and it's really cool. Like, it is very, very expressive. Some people do mouth animations now.
Yeah,
I really do like the drawing on their emotions. And did that idea come out of the fact that they were just little smiley faces at the time?
Yes, and if you look at a lot of old school stop motion, they're all using substitute heads for stuff like that, and even substitute bodies in some cases. If you look at George Powell's Puppetoons from the 40s, you know, things that, you know, a young Ray Harryhausen would have cut his teeth on as a junior animator or something. They've got like wooden toy-like characters walking around on a stop-motion set. You can almost see they've actually got 5 or 6 legs that they just substitute out, so this character can kind of do a cartoon walk, but it's just different wooden blocks positioned there. And those characters are insanely primitive. You know, they kind of open their mouth and you can see, yep, they had 4 heads on the side and they just used them. And occasionally they have an eye roll in there as well, so they carefully use that as well. And so I was sort of doing that, except in a slightly more sophisticated way, mainly because I had 24 heads to play with. I just had to kind of scrape off the originals and then, or turn them around the other way, and I used a Rotring pen to kind of draw on there because it was the only precise thing I had at the time. And even that seemed a bit blobby and horrid in close-up. But yeah, so I basically had to build in my head. So all the characters share the same heads, but I just had different expressions. So one character would tend to use one set of expressions more than, say, another. So our learner L, he's basically the beginner. He's kind of this wide-eyed innocent who gets himself into trouble all the time. And then he's sort of got a P, the probationer. It's a bit more, shall we say, sophomoric. Big brother, a bit more snarky. And then you got the captain. And the captain was the only character that actually had a bit of original Lego artwork on them, which I was very self-conscious about. I should have designed something and stuck it on. Something a bit more spacey. It just comes across as a kind of crude authoritarian. It's like, this doesn't quite work. But oh well, I'm stuck now. You know, I've only got a 1-to-1 shooting ratio. I cannot go back and redo this stuff. So there was absolutely zero undo in any of this. And even had one of my rolls malfunction. I spent 3 weeks shooting a whole roll, and it turned out the shutter of the cable release in the claw mechanism in the camera failed. So instead of getting 3 weeks of animation, 4-minute roll, I got 4 minutes of streak. And the whole thing failed.
And
so that was...
reshoot those 3 weeks? Or you just
I shot it all again in 2 weeks after I had a big tantrum and a huge cry, and I thought, oh God, the world has ended. And then I thought, I can't stop. I've committed to this thing.
So
I'm lashed to the front of this locomotive. I must continue. And off I went. And
so not one room for error. You can't.
No.
If you messed up
so,
one frame,
so my
you just gotta
1.1 to 1
let it
shooting
be.
ratio became a 1-to-1 shooting ratio. Like every shot has to
Yeah.
frickin' work.
Because there are definitely some frames that do have things in them. That
Oh,
shouldn't
yeah.
be. But you know, if you're shooting on film, obviously that really isn't much of an option.
Well,
to fix.
it's part of the charm of film. It's like the reason why Aardman deliberately leaves fingerprints in all its claymation.
Yeah.
You know, I think that you see a lot of beautiful stop motion these days, and it's like, gee, it looks great, but it could almost be CGI. It's so pristine. And the amount of compositing that goes on, it kind of might as well be in some respects. And it's like, yeah, it's
definitely
magical and
feel
stuff, but
that your brick film has a certain magic to
Yeah.
it that just doesn't. It's not there anymore.
I think-
a lot of
yeah, I-
animations.
yeah, I suppose, what would you call it? It's like that, well, I guess if it has anything going for it, it's authenticity. The
And
fact
it
it
feels
is,
very homemade.
yeah, the fact it's homemade is what makes it work.
Yeah.
I'm playing around with a digital remix at the moment, you know, stabilizing all the shots and stuff, and just seeing what it looks like, doing a George Lucas. What am I doing? But I promise there won't be no rings about exploding Death Stars. Yeah, that's been an interesting exercise because you don't realise just how murky and soupy old film is. Once you get past all the film grain, and then you get past all the motion blur, There's not much left to see. And if you take all the grain out, I had a couple of people online saying, oh yeah, take all the grain out and give us, release the thing for free on the internet. I'm thinking, God, this will be another 10,000 hours if I don't watch myself just cleaning this all up. If you take the grain out of film, there's nothing left. Film isn't about, oh, here's a beautiful image. Oh, shame about that noise and grain. Film is the grain. It's pointillism, dot paintings, essentially. That's what it is.
I do remember hearing about that one. The Bricks and Motion community were creating a DVD of some of the earlier brick films, and they did ask for yours Magic Portal to be remastered.
Yeah.
And
I'm sort of working on it, but as a busy lecturer and Wanamate committee member and doing all this other stuff, it's like there's not much room to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my questions. Is you did mention that there was a 4K scan of the Magic.
Yeah, I've actually had the whole thing scanned at about 1.5, 2K. And so I can see all that, cool, soup, wow. And then I've been going through it and just cleaning it up and tidying it up.
And it still looks really good?
It looks great. But yeah, it's like, okay, how far can I push this without it suddenly turning into something it's not? So I think the kind of lumpy quality of about it's still preserved, but it's amazing what happens when you kind of take all the wobbles out and then kind of stabilize it a little bit and then just give a little bit of a grade because, back in the day, I'm counting the minutes as my money hemorrhages away, and they're just doing an old-fashioned seat of your pants grading on the fly. So I'm like, okay, what if I sat down and cleaned this up a bit? What would it look like?
Yeah.
And how much grain do I take out? I don't want to take out too much, but I certainly don't want to see what I had for breakfast on the work print kind of flapping around in there. Let's get rid of all that and see what that does. And then suddenly, oh, hang on, that's 15,000 retouches. That's expensive in time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you is that the master of the original film?
It would be a digitized it's a digital scan of the answer print.
Okay.
So if you're familiar with an answer print?
Modifying the real film.
No, I wouldn't touch that. I've got all the negative around there somewhere. But now, so if you're familiar with it, an answer print was what you would do when you cut your negative together. Send it off to the lab and they'd neg cut it. And basically they'd cut it into an A and B roll. So shot 1, shot 3, shot 5 on one roll, shot 2, shot 4, shot 6 on the other roll. And then they'd have occasionally some bits of negative would overlap, so you could do things like cross dissolve. So you got your A and B roll, and when you were doing your work print, like your tatty old destroyed work print that's been gone through, hundreds of projectors and steam back. It's just a mess. You get out the old Chinagraph for your grease pencil and righto, I want to dissolve from here to there. You'd mark up your whole film with all your cuts and transitions or whatever effects you wanted, and then the lab would put it all together for you. And that was sort of what you'd wait there, have a nervous wait. And then they'd come back with an answer print. Here's what your thing looks like, answer print. And the answer print's just a quick pause, if you like, a quick exposure of the actual negative, and you'd have a look at that. Yes. Okay, we'll make some changes to the grade and this, that, and the other. And that's where your neg timer, your color timer would come in and change the dials on the thing to change the color on the thing, and then you'd go and put out an interpos, which is like a positive version of the final result with all the grades, and then you'd put out then a negative for real distribution. That negative would be the one they'd print all the other things out. So just by getting a film out, you'd go through 5 generations of film just to get that bloody thing out.
How far along is the Magic Portal remaster?
I've got about a quarter to a third of the way through, but I haven't really, it goes in phases. I haven't really had much time to kind of work with it because since COVID, I've been run off my feet. And it's just been a really busy life at the moment.
Yeah.
Partly with some commercial work that we're doing on the side, partly with TAFE work, and partly with the Wanamate stuff as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting with the Wanamate. I did hear about this little... They're the ones that do the little awards night?
Absolutely. We've been doing that for about 10 years now.
Oh, that's
and
amazing.
So we've been trying to push that so it gets out and trying to build up this thing. It's been slow going, but yeah. So we have 2 competitions. There's the Wham Bam, which is essentially a 48-hour animation jam. You turn up on Friday, form a team, pick 3 words out of a hat, make a film in 48 hours, Sunday night screening, all in one weekend. Of late, we've been doing them at SAE, but we'll do them anywhere. And then the other one is the 330 competition, which is where you make 30 seconds of high quality animation over a 3-month period. So we just had the awards night for that about a week or two ago.
Yes, I did hear about that. One of my lecturers put in the Facebook group for our TAFE class that they were looking for a cameraman or two.
Yes, well, generally we're scrounging around for all kinds of resources there. But yeah, so in terms of where we are now, where we were, we're 100 times better off. And that's part of what drives me with Wanimate. It's like, okay, I've had my time, so to speak. Now to kind of like pass the baton and make it as easy as I can for people to kind of get through and work with the committee members to do that. So I'm working with people like Tanya Beeson, who's a bit of a powerhouse for that sort of thing. She's very much into the 2D animation and cartooning and illustration and stuff like that. So she works extensively in that field and works very hard to kind of make all that stuff work. Yeah, it's good. It's very satisfying.
Are you surprised about the impact it's had on the brickfilm community and why?
Well, I guess it's the old adage, I got him first, I suppose, or nearly first. I reckon there's at least probably 2 or 3, 6 others maybe that are probably just unheard of.
There is.
It's like, who made the first feature film in Australia?
There is actually some from the 70s that have surfaced online in the more recent years. But definitely, in my opinion at least, yours is definitely the highest production value of those, and still a lot of people who widely regard it as the best of that era. Well, and there are even some people who are still trying to convince themselves that it is still the first.
Well, I'm flattered, but
you've got some very dedicated fans. You have seen some animation surface online that were from maybe the earlier 80s, and they say that no, Magic Poodle's still somehow the first.
Oh, really? Phew. I feel vaguely relevant still. So my advice to any aspiring brick filmer out there is just go and try and get your film funded by a very hostile funding body, and that will guarantee that you'll thoroughly think it through. So the trick is thoroughly thinking it through. Every single shot pretty much was worried to death before I even committed to it. There were some sequences where I ran around in circles during the storyboarding phase and I just could not get them to work. I think there's one with the train. I had this Michael Bay style thing where I had like 10 different shots and all that stuff, and I just couldn't find the right angle.
It comes through when the cars get jammed in the wall.
And in the end, I was watching a Hitchcock film and I'm thinking, how does he do it? And then realised, well, what am I trying to say? And what am I trying to say? It's like, well, it's being hit by a train. So what's the most scariest thing about being hit on a train? Being stuck on the tracks. And then, wait, we'll just hold the camera on him, and there's a train coming, and it's just coming and coming and coming. It's like, that's just one shot. Well, 2 or 3 shots, but I could do this in a weekend. It's not going to take me 6 weeks of, Michael Baying bullshit.
Sometimes less is more.
Less is more, and that's what I found all the way through this. Every time I was forced to compromise on something, or forced to cut back, or whatever it was, it just got more refined and better. So it was typical for every filmmaker I ever dealt with, every director, or every bit of advice I got from uni or whatever, is that they'd say, we've got these grand visions of what we do, but you're doing really well if only 5% of it ends up on screen. 5%, or maybe 10 if you're really good at what you're doing. So I got about 5 or 10 up there. I was like, yeah, I'm doing all right. And then, so I found it really kind of strange when I see a George Lucas in the future saying, it's not what I wanted. It's like, well, of course it isn't. You're making a film. What were you thinking? And so, that percentage has now jumped sharply. But the trouble is, if you've got, it's like easy come, easy go. If you've got ease of entry, then the first stupid, dumb idea you think of, you can realise, well, then the first stupid, dumb idea is going to be what's on your film. You need, it's like, look at the prequels, for example, the Star Wars prequels. What George really needed wasn't an extra special effects team. What he wanted was a bunch of people saying no to him.
Yeah, you did actually have...
Right? The first Star Wars film, what was it, Marsha Lucas, his ex-wife, basically cut that thing and saved it. Because she was like a second opinion saying, no, stop. This is now getting indulgent.
Yeah,
chop. And what came out was this lean thing that changed the planet. Now, it would have been, she had to work with something, but he still needed someone to basically restrain it. And it became a far better film. And so when you see a lot of bloated blockbusters now, you're getting a lot of decision making that's basically making all these dumb decisions for all the wrong reasons. And, I think some of the older films feel better because when you've only got $100,000 to make, I married a teenage monster from outer space, and you've only got 3 weeks to shoot it, like, well, this is going to be a pretty terrible film, so we've got to make everything count. So even a crappy big film will have something memorable about it. Whereas a lot of its stuff just feels like it's just, it's just whatever happened to happen on the day. It's like, well, who cares? I might as well get a security camera and shoot the bloody film.
Especially nowadays, even in the brick film community, you really can just make up anything on
Yep.
the fly. Your film had to have extreme planning and preparation.
Yeah.
And in my experience anyway, at least, if I'm shooting something and it's terrible and it's just not working, I can just delete it and start something different. And there's no harm.
If only. Look, even partially deleting stuff would have improved it 10 times over. Having too much of that becomes a short circuit. It's like we get lots of students coming into our course and they've got lots of talent, and they go, "Oh yeah, I do anime." It's like, well, great, thanks, but it's not like we don't like anime. It's just that it becomes a short circuit. Or a lot of fan fiction is basically, we fixate on this thing, and it's always usually a successful thing. So it's very easy to fixate on because there's an audience or a market for it. It's quite different when I'm making the Magic Portal in 1985.
It is, yes.
I'm the only human on the planet, it seems, that's doing this sort of thing. I have no idea where it's going to frickin' go. I had no idea if it was even going to work. Here I am spending all this time and effort around the clock. I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing with my life? Anxiety. And then I finally dragged the thing out. And I think, get it onto SBS. I think it got screened 6 times in SBS on the Eat Carpet Show, which was some old experimental TV, late night experimental TV kind of compilation. A bit of an institution back in the day. And that's when I started getting, I think people are liking this. Whew. Okay, I think we're okay. And then shortly after that, the fees I got from SBS, basically got me halfway through Swinburne. So I was eating hand to mouth for a long time. And then basically I got some fan mail from some kid who invited me down to his high school, to his primary school. And he said, yeah, why don't you come down and show the Magic Portal there? He'd only caught the last half of it. I don't think he even saw the Lego bit in the beginning. He just caught the last half of it. And he was so impressed, he hunted me down, found out where I was studying, sent me a letter, invited me to his school within like 2 or 3 weeks. And I go up there, I've got this crappy old VHS tape. I think, well, here it is, plug it into the VHS player on the audio-visual stand. There's about 100 grade 1s and 2s sitting there thinking, oh man, here I am doing a Fat Cat impersonation. And then I put it in, 10 seconds in, they've all gone bonkers. And it's like, what the hell? They're practically climbing all over the bloody VCR. I was like, whoa, what's going on? And yeah, I was like, oh, thank God, it works. And then I realized, oh shit, it's not mine anymore. It's loose on the world. I can't pull it back now. It's like, it's out there. It's like, it's got a life of its own now. It's like, whatever I think or say about it no longer matters. And I realized, oh yeah, this is my opening night. A bunch of little 10-year-olds, 3 or 9-year-olds going crazy over this film.
Yeah. And there's definitely something to say about how yours is a very original idea, and how a lot of the brick films, even today, sadly, are quite successful because of IP.
Yes.
And
that's familiarity. So that's the thing about fandom. A lot of it trades on familiarity. It's like when you see people gas-banging about, Snyder cuts and stuff like that. Yeah, fan edits are awesome, like good old-fashioned bootlegs. But the thing is, a lot of that stuff is trading on familiarity. It's like you see people doing a comedy of something, and it's about as funny as a broken leg. And it's not trading on anything other than the fact that it's familiar, and they're all responding to the familiarity of their tribal group, if you like, their little community group.
Some of those parody reference movies are
the stuff,
absolutely garbage.
Yeah, the stuff that would actually get me out of bed is someone that actually does something unusual and different. You think, whoa, I would never have thought of that in 1,000 years. It's like, where did that come from? There's somebody doing something. And when we invented our Wanimate competitions, like the Wham Bam and the 330 competitions, we deliberately made a point of, right, on the Wham Bam stuff, 48 hours, you have no idea what you're going to be working on. You're going to pick 3 words out of a hat, that's your film. You've got 48 hours, go. And what happens is we get all this amazingly original stuff because nobody has any expectations of whether it's going to work or not. They just get off there and do it, and everyone gets surprised at what pops up. Hey, that's pretty cool. I never would have thought of that in 1,000 years. You know, it goes off and makes something else with it.
Yeah.
So that subtle thing is really important to us because that's what's going to keep you going in the future. The only thing that kept me going in the Magic Portal was a little bit of advice I picked up from one, I can't even remember who it was, and they said, well, it doesn't matter how persistent you are, can your idea survive the process of being made? Is it worthwhile doing? In other words, what have you got to say? Are you going to get there? Will it survive? And one of the things that was quietly nibbling at the back of my head was, oh yeah, if I do all this, do I still want to keep working on it in 12 months' time, 2 years' time, or heaven help me, 10 years' time? And that was it. So all these questions had to be resolved before I could even get going. Right, and that's a process that's kind of absent in a world that's driven by algorithms that demand instant gratification all the time, non-stop. So that's why streaming's so popular. But yeah, if you can find somebody that's actually doing that stuff, that means someone somewhere has to put in a stupid amount of time to get very little out of it. So most of the modern social media is completely antagonistic to what you'd call classical animation, I suppose, because it's such a huge thing to do. It's a challenge. Yeah, so I guess in my day, I was living in an airless moonscape. I guess your problem now is that you're living in the middle of the ocean and you have to dig a hole with a shovel to keep your hole in the ocean going. If you stop, you just disappear. You just drown. It's a different kind of environment. I'm not sure how I could have coped with that one. Yeah, it's a different set of challenges. But at the same time, you've got some of the most extraordinary tools at your disposal. Stuff that would take me 4.5 years can now take you 4.5 days. So that works as well. So there's a whole different set of paradigms going on here.
Yeah. Well, how long did the outdoor scene take to shoot? Because
most of that took a weekend.
Depending on light.
That was actually, well, a high Perth summer, the light just doesn't change. It's about F32 in the sun and about F4 in the shadows. Like, ooh, okay. And you start off covered in sunscreen and stuff, and then by the end of it, you're pretty much down to your swimmers and a sunburn. Yeah. We're running out of chip now, are we?
You might have to start wrapping up soon.
Luckily,
Yeah.
Luckily, there's only one last question.
Okay.
If you were to do it again, would you do it all differently, or would you?
Well, of course, it'd all be done differently. It would be digital. But one thing I would have picked up from the first one is that rigorous pre-production. That's where you pretty much make all your decisions, so that when you come to do production, such as it is, and pre-production, production, and post-production are all blurred together now. So when you come to do your pre-production, you've pretty much made all your major decisions, and the rest is whatever spontaneous stuff you discover on the fly is done. So in a sense, we're going to do this, and it's all worked out. We know where we're going, why we're doing it, why we're here, all that stuff. It's going to survive, and then you get spontaneous in those conditions. You've worked out where all the rubbish isn't. It's gone. You've got a pretty focused idea, whatever it happens to be. So what we've noticed in some of the successful 330 competition winners is that they spent 2/3 of their time humming and hawing about what they were doing, and then they did a mad dash at the end. And that turned out to be more successful than people that went, yes, project, it looks all kind of boring. And yeah, you got to work out what you're doing and where you're going. And especially in this day and age, if you want something to be persistent, you got to put those decisions and put those obstacles in, and then make sure it's tested before it gets going.
Right,
yeah.
Well, thank you for answering all my questions.
Oh, I could keep rabbiting on for a few hours, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes, so that's pretty much all I need to ask you.
Yeah.
After the cameras cut, Fleay was more than happy to keep talking about the film and give us some new info. The sound of the characters walking on metal was made by Fleay getting his sister to walk up and down the shopping mall escalators. Here is some interesting stuff. The old shoe the characters drove around in. To get to hold this ratty old shoe was truly amazing. The fact that the figures still had their drawn details on it was pretty cool too.
But some of these,
This massive poster here is what Fleay called an uncompressed JPEG, a block-mounted poster on hardwood stamped on with wax. Truly eye-catching and a one-of-a-kind thing to see in person. You could see it from across the room. Here are some scene setups, particularly the setup for the car chase layout.
Chase scene. Oh, that's the original Lego Magic Portal
Here is some dialogue tracks, where Fleay kept a note of the audio tracks with ambience, sound effects, music, and dialogue.
So you're inventing and discovering your film as you make it.
Yeah, I find that too.
Heels on an escalator.
That's awesome.
So things like Thomas had this amazing, he was a German guy, and he had this incredible...
The spaceship hums were done with an analog synth. And how about some of these storyboards? Some of these were scanned digitally and put on Lindsay Fleay's website in early 2004, but a lot of these were not. The only ones that were digitized were these ones here, the ones talking about the car chase. All the rest of this stuff here has never been seen before. Maybe one day we'll get to see a digital scan of all the rest of the storyboards too.
And then modified the font so it was slightly horror show, bit John Carpenter. That's how I do it. And originally, if I was going to make a sequel, I think I had this mad idea I was going to rip off 2001, and then end up going to a plank. It's don't get stopped by that. If that's your only problem, well, you're laughing.
Yeah, that's what makes some good names and stuff.
Definitely. So everything was.
But they were definitely a sight to see in person. These are some cancelled plans for a sequel, which would have had some weird creature eating the characters. Fleay also talked about the ending of said sequel, where the Lego would discover an empty Barbie house. All in all, this experience was a lot of fun. To get to know more about this film and hold some of the set pieces in hand was truly amazing, and definitely a cool experience. Thanks Lindsay for sitting down and talking with me, and a special thanks to my crew for helping me do this. I couldn't have done it without you guys. I hope anyone who was a fan of this film learnt something, and hopefully now we know even more brick film history than we did before.